Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the third edition of the Communicators Assembly Point, a weekly webinar series brought to you by Adfactors PR in partnership with Reputation Today. In every edition of the series, we try and focus on one sector to see how leaders from that sector are navigating reputation in this post-COVID era and how they plan to take communication ahead. The focus for this edition is healthcare. Before I introduce our panelists, let me remind you the hashtag for today is Comms Ahead. Do share your learnings from this session using the hashtag Comms Ahead. And don't forget to tag our partner Adfactors PR and Rep Today Mag. This session is also being live relayed on YouTube on bit.ly/YT. So if you have friends who missed signing up, they can watch it live on YouTube. A warm welcome once again to all the 230+ attendees who signed up today. For all those who have joined in using Zoom, please feel free to ask questions using the Q&A box. I would now like to welcome our panelists for today. Bhavna Singh, Senior Director, Communications at OPPI. Jasrita Dhir, Head of Brand, Marketing and CSR at Fortis Healthcare. Rufina Magline, Head of Communications at Roche Diagnostics, India and neighboring countries, and Manjira Sharma, Head of External Communications at Lupin. And moderating the session today is Noumaan Qureshi, Healthcare Practice Lead at Adfactors PR. Over to you, Noumaan, to steer this conversation ahead.
Thank you, Anubhuti, and good afternoon, all the people on Zoom and on YouTube watching this program. A warm welcome again to all the panelists, and thank you for being on the panel. Thank you to the Reputation Today team, Amit, Roshan, and Anubhuti for helping us organize this program. Just wanted to set the context for this discussion. We are going to talk about healthcare communication. We are not going to go into the science of healthcare communication. The important part is we are going to talk what is happening today, what we see happening in the foreseeable future, and do we foresee any change in communication or how communication might change going forward. Post-COVID maybe is not the right term because all the conversation in healthcare right now is that for a foreseeable future, we might have to learn to live with COVID. So when is post-COVID? Actually, nobody can predict. So we go with that. We start the discussion with Jasrita, and the reason being we did some data analysis of the coverage which has come on COVID as a subject in the last 50+ days that we have been in lockdown. And we realized that since healthcare, which is the healthcare delivery part, which also includes hospitals, has got the highest visibility in terms of all the subjects that we track. So that is one reason, Jasrita, you should start because you represent the largest sector. One good thing about this panel is that this panel before healthcare has worked in different sectors, in hotel, in banking, in manufacturing, and worked on premium brands. So they also bring experience from other sectors before coming to healthcare. So we are going to benefit from that experience as well. So Jasrita, to start the conversation, I have a question, and this is a question for all the panelists going forward. Is the end user or the patient or the caregiver in healthcare running ahead of the sector in terms of technology adoption? So, when COVID happened, we immediately saw that people moved on to e-consultation as a, practice. And people who had never done e-consultation before very easily moved into those platforms. There were some third-party service providers who came into the picture and immediately connected the patient caregiver to the doctor that they wanted to connect with. Also, if you see the developments in wearable technology that has happened, it's empowering the end user with information. So one of the biggest challenges in healthcare always has been the information asymmetry. So the patient or the end user most of the time is not aware of what's happening. But with this new technology, lot of information is in the control of the end user. So is the end user running ahead of the sector in terms of technology adoption? How do you look at that scenario?
Thank you, Noumaan. So first of all, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure talking to all of you this rather balmy afternoon. Noumaan, your question is exactly right, but when you live in a country which is the size of a continent, there can be no one all-pervasive answer. So when you ask me about the consumer, my answer has to be yes and no, and I'll bring in the nuance, right? It depends on where you are. If you are in a place like Bangalore, Fortis has the benefit of being present in large metro, all 5 metro cities of the country, as also in places like Jaipur, Ludhiana, Amritsar, etc., right? So, if you're in a place like Bangalore, just to take an example, then yes, the consumer is really ahead of the curve, and that's a place where consumers were already demanding that, why aren't you doing e-consults? And I think the healthcare delivery sector was taking some tentative steps till the time that, health being a state subject in our country, the state medical councils did not issue a certification in black and white saying that for the period of the pandemic, doing e-consultations is fine, So, while all of us were taking tentative steps at that point in time, but Bangalore is one of the markets, to take an example, which said that, that's the need of the hour. We need to mitigate the risk to both your healthcare workers as well as ourselves, right? However, now if you look to places like Ludhiana and Amritsar and all of that, I wouldn't say that the digital penetration is the same, and therefore the consumer warmed up as easily, or as swiftly to e-consultation platforms, right? So that's point number one, that, I think you have to take into perspective where your end consumer is. And when you are somebody who's this larger size spread across, tier 2, tier 3, as well as metros, there is that. And therefore you have to, spend more time, have more patience, or come up with some communication aids, visual aids where you handhold the people where you have to. One size fits all doesn't sort of help. The solution remains the same, but I think how much time you give to people for adoption, how much you're hand-holding them, what communication aids you're giving them, that makes all the difference, and where the role of communicators, marketeers, brand people sort of comes in. That's point number one. Point number two, very quickly, because you have to go to others as well, and this is just the opening one, is, this whole barrage of information. You spoke about information asymmetry. That also poses twin challenges. So while for COVID, thankfully, there was so much information that actually overtook our lives, whether you look at whatever form that you like, where you consume your information, there's only COVID, which actually, if you want any non-COVID information, you have to really look for it hard. But at the same time, I think there was, in the beginning, a lot of, like it happens in any, crisis, a lot of fake news, a lot of myths, which also needed to be busted. So a lot of energy was also going in the area saying, listen, don't disinfect yourselves, okay? That's not going to kill COVID, but you'll have a skin infection. Or, boiling garlic water is not going to rid you of all of that, right? I think our communication channels, especially social media, was working in two, trying to have what the government is saying, the policies which are changing every day, because it's nobody's fault. It's nobody knew what hit us. And at the same time, handling the whole fake news and all of that pandemic. So I think that's what we've been trying to do. And, I think over a period of time, one has got a hang of it. I think I'll rest. I'll pause here.
Yeah. Sure. So next we go to Rufina, because that's the other end of the spectrum, which is the diagnostics part. Rufina, coming back to the information asymmetry that the patient always had, and now that there is a larger awareness about tests, rapid tests, and different terminology which has come into the conversations, do you see this is an opportunity to drive the quality narrative in healthcare? Because to give you an example, a patient or an end user pays 9,000 rupees for a CT scan without realizing whether it's a 56 slide scan or whether it's a 256 slide scan, or what regions are going into the laboratory tests. But is this an opportunity now to drive the quality narrative? Also looking at the accreditation status for labs in the country.
Actually, it's a rather long question, but thanks, Noumaan. I'll try and see if we can break that up into parts and see if we can address them. The primary thing is about diagnostics itself as a healthcare discussion. And I can ask my fellow panelists here if there is an opportunity. How many of us have actually looked upon diagnostics as an important part of the healthcare continuum? The question was, yes, if I fall ill, I will go to a doctor. So a hospital comes into the picture. Yes, if I fall ill, of course, I'm going to take a drug. So the pharma piece comes into the picture. But diagnostics has always been in the backyards, if you know what I mean. And if even today you went into most of the hospitals, you will find your diagnostic labs in the basements. Now, that was where diagnostics was because of the sheer technology that goes behind diagnostics as a subject. The discussions were very technical. It was far too scientific for people to understand. And nobody could answer the question of what is the right amount of diagnosis to do for any particular disease condition. There's no answer to that, right? So all of these actually put diagnostics as a subject. Well, oh, wow, all right, fine. You're definitely required, but I do not know how much required you are. And then comes COVID into our lives. And pre-COVID times, we were talking about the value of diagnostics and why it is required, because actually, diagnosis is the basis of 60% of all clinical decisions in the world. And it's not just in India. So typically, what would you do? If you needed to take a decision on what you need to do as a clinical pathway, you need to go and get a diagnostic test done. So we were harping on the value of diagnostics until COVID-19 struck. And then COVID-19 happened, and starting from the very upper echelons of power to the common man on the street, everybody's questions was on how can I get tested for COVID-19? And people started talking the language of differentiation between screening tests, diagnostic tests. So the conversation became a lot easier in this circumstance, though it is in very morbid circumstances. And I wouldn't want this kind of a situation to happen again, for people to know the value of diagnostics and the role it plays in their life. So typically, if you ask me about the differentiation and the technology adoption and what needs to be done from a common man's perspective, I think the role of healthcare communicators today is not so much as deciphering or talking about the adoption of technology, but about simplifying the role of technology in healthcare communications and in decision making. How do we simplify it? Is it something like an access model for patients? Because patients accept and understand disease areas. They understand not the coronavirus and how it works. They understand COVID-19. That's an important part for us to understand as communicators. They don't understand if it is a rapid test or a serology-based test or a lab-based test. They do not understand it. So for a common man, the understanding of what is the simplified form of diagnostics and its role in their day-to-day lives is important. That's what we're doing at this point in time, since there is a lot of amenability to listen to this kind of a conversation. In the regulation side, since you spoke about NAPL, we are in very active dialogue, and the government has been absolutely open to talk about establishing healthcare infrastructure and all that goes with it, because regulation is just one part of setting up healthcare infrastructure. They are now talking about a preventive healthcare and an infectious diseases healthcare infrastructure that will help us fight such pandemics in the future and such uncertain conditions in the future, because we cannot keep learning as we go along the way. Now is the time to learn, and how do we prepare the nation for the future? Those are the kind of conversations that are happening. And I'm sure that these will yield results as we go along the way, but everything is in execution excellence. I always boil down to that. Conversations are great. All of the wonderful conversations that communicators are doing is great, but it needs to finally make sense to the common man. It needs to translate to benefit to the common man. So execution excellence on the regulatory side, healthcare infrastructure side, and deciphering diagnostics and healthcare communications is critical.
So thank you, Rufina. Going to Bhavna, since Bhavna represents the innovator side of the pharmaceuticals. So Bhavna, there is a lot of conversation, and the world is waiting in hope for a vaccine or a medicine to come to deal with the situation. So how would the member companies of OPPI look at communication? Because setting expectations correct would also be one of the objectives. One has seen conversations moving from hydrochloroquine, being spoken about as a subject, and then, when are the vaccines coming? So there's a lot of expectation that the stakeholders have at large. So the agenda is being set by the other parties, not by the sector. So how would member companies look at it?
Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. And before I really get into Noumaan's question, a very quick thank you to Amit and the Reputation Today team and my friend Madan Behel and the Adfactors team for having me here. Your question was rather intriguing and interesting, Noumaan, but the OPPI, which represents the research-based pharmaceutical industry in India, we believe that today more than ever, and with the COVID backdrop, the whole world is looking at this industry with very, very expectant eyes to come out with a probable solution to the pandemic. And like you said, the expectations, the agenda, everything is being said by everybody else. But I think there are 2-3 things that have really stood out in this. Number one is that the fact that the pharma industry exists because of our patients. So we keep the patients at the center of all that we do. COVID, no COVID, emergency, no emergency. So I think this fact has, and God forbid we needed this morbid situation to bring it to the fore, but I think our stakeholders, especially the patients across the globe, have realized the value of science, the value of research, and the value of actually having a scientific temper built up, because ultimately, if you need a probable solution, you have to look at science to get one for you. So, and that's the expectation and that's the hope. And as healthcare communicators, all our member companies are proud to be associated with an industry such as ours, because we literally touch millions of lives. And the second part of your question is, what will health communicators do? So we have this responsibility of sharing the inspiring stories of our scientists, our researchers in every member company fighting the COVID in their labs. So these are stories of inspiration, stories of science, innovation, medical research, stories of how the future of patient care is actually going to be redefined. So these are all the concepts, these are all the topics, these are all realities which all our member companies, and in fact the entire healthcare industry, is going to be soon faced with. And this is what our member companies are preparing to speak and engage with our patients. And that's what we feel will be the future topics of engagement.
So, Manjira, the question for you is from the pharmaceutical side. So one, field force is a very important part of the pharmaceutical industry. And since this COVID thing has happened, a lot of digitization and engagement with the doctors, with the end user or the prescriber has moved to digital landscape. What kind of change communication you foresee companies will undertake, because this might require some kind of new skill building amongst the people for engagement with doctors? So what kind of change management do you expect to take place, or is it already happening?
Hi. So first, great question, Noumaan, and thanks for having me here at Factors and Reputation today. It's great to talk to and hear points of view and how we've all been impacted in such a short span of time. Communicators, how we are also revising our ways of working. So, Noumaan, it's not just Indian pharma or diagnostics. I think technology is something, leveraging and adoption of technology is no longer something you can push away. I think, as Jasrita said at the onset, its penetration will differ across cities across the country, but it is an inadvertent reality. And we were aware of it, and we rose up to that well before COVID. However, what COVID did was overnight, it stripped us of the social connection. So our field force who would go to a doctor and who would explain about a new nephro product, which had certain benefits for patients who had a kidney transplant, they could not do it, but that did not mean that that need overnight disappeared from the market. You still have to do it. And so, teams leapt into action. How do you train these field force to conduct their entire work on the, via tele and virtual platforms? The doctor engagement cannot stop. We saw that doctors in smaller towns were inundated with patient calls. They could not really go and visit their clinics. So you could not wash your hands off at that time and say that my job is only to sell the medicine. We also looked at onboarding and assisting them, tying up with third-party telemedicine centers where the doctor could be a part of. We bore part of the cost, and we facilitated that interaction with patients as well. So all of this will continue because social distancing, as you said, COVID will continue. And I think increasingly we are also not just seeing this in emerging markets like India, but also in hospital-centric markets like the US. We have seen this adoption and movement towards virtual engagement platforms. And that will have to, I think, continue.
So, one heard two words, crisis, pandemic, and unprecedented. I think these words have become part of the lexicon. If you really see the definition of the word crisis, the dictionary definition of the word crisis is a disease condition, an inflection point in a disease condition, which can either go well or it can go worse off. That actually is the description of the word crisis. So how as communicators, you would look at what has happened with COVID, that it provides an opportunity for more communication, coming over this information asymmetry that exists with the end user. What kind of communication opportunities you see opening up? I'll give you one example. If you look at one industry which really went out and spoke, was the newspaper industry. So when this whole issue started, you saw this front page advertisements where all the large newspapers came together and said, this is the time where we are credible source of information. The point that Jasrita raised, there was an advertising campaign that newspapers ran to increase their credibility amongst the reader. Is that some kind of a thing that healthcare can also look at? But because healthcare is at the epicenter of this whole issue that is happening around the world, is there some communication opportunity that we foresee with this pandemic? So maybe we start with Bhavna. You spoke about scientific temperament and how this is becoming the cornerstone of the communication.
So certainly there are various, I think it's human behavior, right? Supposing there is a crisis, we all turn to experts and seek their advice. We turn to people who we think are more credible, who are authentic, who are experts, and we seek advice from them. That's human behavior. And this is no different even for healthcare communications. People are seeking the right information as the pharma industry, for example, and I can speak for the research-based pharma industry that I represent, it is our responsibility to ensure that we share the authentic information, we communicate the right things to the patients who are already panicked. We kind of dispel the myths that are available or the false information that's available, which is what Jasrita said earlier in terms of having myths about drinking boiling garlic water, whatever. So I think in terms of healthcare communication, it is very important that we continue to have a very sharp and focused communication. And with digital, it is also possible to ensure that healthcare communication is personalized. Right? With digital, it's very easy for us to understand the browser history, to understand what a Noumaan or Rufina or Manjira is interested in, what are the topics she reads. You get an idea of who that person is. So I don't really need to see you to understand what you like, what you don't like. And that helps me to build in my healthcare communication. Supposing I know that you are a health freak and you like to, let's say, view recipes which are fat-free, then I know that, you are weight conscious, you're fitness conscious. I'll start sending you material on well-being, on health, on wellness. So with digital technology, it's very, on one hand, very sharp, very focused, making it more personalized. So I think it is an opportunity for us to utilize it, to deploy technology, to use it wisely, and to obviously dispel the myths that are present amongst the minds of the people. And I think that's the way forward for patient communication as well, because we see that most of the communication is now digital, whether it is disease management, whether it is patient communication. So it's all there. And ironically, it was the pharma industry which was one of the last to adopt digital technology when you compare it to a retail or an insurance or banking or telecom. But today, we have been able to channelize this technology and use it to the benefits of patients. And I think that's been a remarkable job of, and I think healthcare communicators can take a little bit of credit there.
Sure. Jasrita, your view?
Yes, I see many roles that rolled into one that this pandemic has offered for healthcare communicators, and I will get to them one by one. The first is that because between us we largely represent the private healthcare sector, right? And on the private side of it, mostly one has not dealt with public health issues. There is this sort of divide between it's the government's job to talk about DOTS and polio and contagious diseases and communicator, and we'll talk about the strokes and the brain tumors and what have you, largely this unspoken thing, right? I think the first thing is that it brought to the fore the value that a whole lot of healthcare providers, I think everyone has in their mission vision statement, which is patient centricity, which is patient safety and patient focus. So there's one thing that if you see a whole lot of communication that was happening, and I'm not just talking about Fortis, but I mean, you look across the spectrum and you see, was to do with patient safety, right? The third is, I think truly this became a collaborative, effort, whether it is between governments and private players, whether you want to talk the public-private sector partnership about it, or the provider as well as the patient, right? Because there is nothing virtually, practically that we can do alone, right? Okay, so we can do whatever, to ensure that our hospital premises are safe, are as infection-free as possible. But if the barrage of patients coming in are not practicing social distancing or the regular 3-4 things which you have to do for your own safety, there goes the effort. Okay, and the government would do as much as they can. They need private sector needs government. So I think the whole collaboration which was happening with the government agencies, a collaboration that happened between provider and the patient, looking at public health issues, patient centricity, actually taking center stage and not just being in some on a website or in some fancy notes. I think that was important. And two more things. I think the role of communicators was also a lot in allaying the fears and the fear psychosis, because the way we saw the pandemic was the way the infection was manifesting itself in other countries, the mortality rates were rather high, so God bless, the way it has been in India, it has been very low, and I hope it stays that way or goes even lower. So to allay the fear psychosis which was in the general population, I think there's a role that communicators have played across. And last, I think our role has been, is, and always should be in a crisis to inject positivity. Somebody has to keep that positive equilibrium going. Okay. That 82-year-old patient, who gets well and is discharged, she needs to be given a red carpet. You need to make a video, you need to put it up there. That's the video that you boost and you say it is possible. So I think these are the roles that healthcare communicators have played and should play.
Rufina, your thoughts?
I have two very quick thoughts here. Since you spoke about tools, Noumaan, we have been talking about the various things that communicators have been doing, especially in this COVID-19 situation. And you spoke about crisis, and you defined crisis. Well, the only hope is this crisis doesn't become chronic, because if it does, then it's going to be a whole lot of a different a work portfolio that communications and probably industries are going to have to look at. But coming back to the 2 points, healthcare is all about a responsibility to people. So when you did speak about the front page ad and all of the messaging that the publishing industry took forth, healthcare cannot be seen as opportunistic. There are people who are genuinely ill, and there are people who are losing lives for less or more in the country. That's a different story. But there are people who are losing lives, and this is a rather dark situation. So I completely am with Jasrita, who said that there needs to be some element of positivity that we inject into the communities with the messaging that we do. But let us please bear in mind that we are in a space where people are going to believe what we are saying because we are seen to be the experts, right? We are going to be seen as the people who are going to be giving them answers to some of the questions that's burning in their mind. And at that time, taking out a large campaign on a disease area almost seems a little insensitive to me. So I think striking that right balance of sounding and being sensitive to the needs of people, and at the same time making the right judicious call on what and how to communicate is absolutely critical. Because to me, healthcare communications is not a privilege, it's a responsibility. One. The second point that I'd probably like to leave behind with this conversation is that we probably need to be some engines trying to help people ease into daily life.
Your voice is not clear. Rufina will come back in a while. Manjira, your view on?
I think so. Largely agreeing with what is being said here. But Noumaan, at the onset, I think I'm not going to deny that this is a big. This is a time when we have to communicate more than ever, and responsible communication, because COVID is not an economic crisis. It's not a military crisis. It's not an environmental crisis. Some of these crises would, those could be follow on from COVID, but the onset is a healthcare crisis. And it's very imperative that Indian pharma and Indian brands, we and all brands actually, we speak beyond the brand, which I can see a lot of us doing that on social media. So demystifying a lot of myths and fake news. Not all of it is also fake news. Somebody could have just had something, a particular arsenic alba homeopathic medicine, and they could have recovered, and they feel that becomes so. Bringing scientific temper to that conversation is very important, and that's a job of all brands today who are part of healthcare, because it's not about a Lupin that is making a chloroquine or a hospital treating patients with great improvement rates, but it is about demystifying that, and it's also offering that beacon of very transparent hope. I think which is important, that yes, while the entire history of epidemics, we had the Spanish flu, we had the smallpox, and it seemed almost the end of the road then. Smallpox was so feared in parts of India and across India, the ravage it has caused, but we overcame that. And now today in India, you have the Prime Minister paying homage to the frontline workers. You have the President of the United States actually calling you up and saying that, you can't have an export ban on these medicines. So India is a very critical part of the global supply chain. And I think that comes with a great responsibility. So we need to also continuously keep focusing on other chronic ailments, which I'm not saying are being forgotten, but which probably will lead to greater mortality. TB is still a cause of concern. What about malaria? Are we leaving those conversations behind? And as healthcare practitioners, we need to talk to not just our customers, our leadership teams, and also, probe them that, hey, you may just want to talk about this. This is also the need of the hour. Stroke is a big issue in our country, and today, hospital access is becoming limited for people who are, having those ailments. So we have to be at the front line of that conversation, drive it, and offer, I would say, transparent hope that, testing kids, the need of the hour was testing. Great. I mean, everybody knows that greater testing is what is going to lead to greater rationalization of end mortality and the final cure. And today you have brands coming out saying that, they have at very affordable rates, India is manufacturing those testing kits. What about PPEs? That was a scarcity across the globe. So today you have Indian brands actually going into that PPE space. Vaccine development, we are not behind, we are there, and brands from India are on that space. So I think that that line between research-based and final healthcare provider and generic companies, it doesn't really matter. We are the last bastion. We have to offer that, all of that which is being done, because if you're there, if this is going to continue for the next 2 or 3 or 5 years, the efforts have to continue. So I think that transparent hope and very responsible communication across all these areas is very important.
So one question, and maybe we'll wind up. Communication has 2 elements. One is the speaking part, and the other is the listening part. So how much, would the panelists think that contextual listening is happening in the healthcare space? So when I say contextual listening, I just looked at the data that our digital team put out. So, COVID was one of the most searched topics on the net. But in COVID, it was fever as a topic, which was the most searched topic amongst all the related topics that were done. Jasrita spoke about evolved markets. Mumbai was the market from where the highest number of Google searches were done in terms of COVID. It may also correlate with the number of cases that the city has.
Yeah.
So there are correlations that one can draw. So how much contextual listening are we doing is the question, and how are we aligning our communication? So speaking positive cases is one part, but what is actually the end user wanting to hear is the other part. So one of the most searched topics in Google was health insurance. So, how much are we listening and then, adopting our communication to fulfill the information need that the end user has? So if health insurance was the most searched topic, what kind of communication could have happened or is happening just to meet that information need of the end user? So how much contextual listening is happening in the healthcare space, which might be happening with brands? They might be listening to all the conversation. So that was one question.
Noumaan, I can probably try and attempt this because it's in context to probably where I slipped away in the last response as well. It's not about today that we always have to keep deliberating and discussing, because I think all of us here are experts, and we have communications colleagues also on the call who know how to deal with it today in as far as a crisis situation goes, right? And in an extraordinary situation goes. But I think it's all about the tomorrow, because we need to start encouraging people to talk about their tomorrow. How do they prevent something like that from happening to their lives, and how impacting their lives tomorrow? And that is where this case of preventive healthcare, keeping your immune system well, your wellness is important. Your health insurance is your financial wellness, and your physical wellness can be managed with your preventive healthcare. All of these are very, very important topics that we need to start discussing about today for 2 reasons. Because there is a lot of appetite to listen, and that's what our social media listening is telling us. There is an appetite to hear about healthcare, because, by the way, do you know the top 10 searched items Google worldwide before COVID-19, healthcare used to be at least amongst the top 5. Whereas in India, if the top 10 would not have healthcare ever in the past 5 years. We kept tracking that. However, today there is an appetite. People are searching for healthcare. They want to know about particular illnesses and the implications on their immune system, because COVID-19 is lurking. So it is important to not just listen, but also drive them to decision making, because what we see in India through our listening tools is that, yes, we are willing to search, we're willing to do things, but either there is no infrastructure to implement it, or the decisions are not getting made. So how do we drive decision making towards the future, where you ease up some of the burdens in people's minds, saying, oh, this is going to come to bite me, COVID-19 is going to kill me if I step out of the house, to if I maintain my immunity, if I do preventive healthcare in the right way, keep me mentally fit and physically fit, and then also have the right amount of insurance, then I'm looking at a holistic package where this is not going to be an issue in the future, and probably even others are not going to be a huge issue if at all it comes back to bite. So typically, the gear change happens now where we stop talking about deliberating and looking at today and solutions for today, because that is something that we are anyway is expert at. What are going to be the needs tomorrow of some of our audiences? It could be the consumers and the mass audiences, or it could be doctors, because doctors are going to have to need other kinds of tools. The direct face-to-face interactions may not be possible, like the way they were happening in the pre-COVID times. So what are the various stakeholders? How is their future going to look like is absolutely critical for us to understand, to tailor tools for us to make communication relevant to those stakeholders for tomorrow, because I think enough has been spoken about today and we need to really switch gears and move on and give confidence to people.
Jasrita wanted to make a point.
Yeah. So, what I wanted to start with on this particular point is that I don't think any one of us saw this coming. So first of all, I don't think anyone's ahead of the curve. Okay, so that conversation is out of the window. Let's just settle that, right? Everyone is trying to chase the tail. So now the rat race is who's chasing the tail faster, okay, or better, right? So I think that's where we are. The pandemic, the issues, the problems that it's causing, it's all far ahead of us, and we are in our, with our resources, with the time, with, where you are geographically, you're trying to sort of deal with it, right? However, once one was able to come to grips with, what you are up against, I see a lot of brands, I see a lot of, organizations which did step up on their social listening, to also to join cause with what Rufina was saying, So I can certainly speak for, some statistics that on our social listening tool, in the month of February, the mentions that we had for the brand were around 4,000. I was looking at the April data and the numbers have jumped to 18,000. Okay, so 18,000 mentions. That's because healthcare is the top of the pyramid, of the essential services pyramid, the concerns. And within that, again, like Rufina was saying, you have to then break it down into the very urgent, where people are looking for beds, so how you can sort of assist them, that becomes your urgent, emergent quadrant. You have to do, like in an emergency area, people do triaging. They say, this is a stroke patient, you have to do a bit of a triaging, even in the social listening that you're doing, that, what do you attend to first and what you can get to in a bit. We looked at the kind of mental health issues that were, coming up, and, we've been doing webinars, etc. for corporates. We've been running a stress helpline, and it's a free stress helpline across the country in 15 languages, etc. So that's what, we're trying to do here. And again, to quote some statistics, which only tells the scale of the problem, is that while earlier there were 200 calls that would land up in a month, there are about 300 to 400 calls which are coming in a week, So no one, by putting all their resources, any single entity, any single team can do. We all have to, sort of be in it together. The other is, again, we have to look at, and this is where I wanted to come in on Manjira's point. I completely agree with her that, like it happens in, in media, traditional media or wherever, that the crisis of today, overtakes and overshadows the crises of yesterday. It shouldn't happen in our case. It shouldn't happen, So today, COVID and COVID-related issues are a problem, but there are people who are dying at home with strokes because they do not have access, or they're just too scared of, stepping out. So people shouldn't be dying of heart attacks and strokes at home. What are you going to do of that? And pandemic or no pandemic, babies are going to come. Babies are not going to, so what do you do? If somebody is due for a delivery during such time, how do you ensure that you give a safe environment, first of all, safe passage to your facility, and safe environment to the mother and to the baby? So I think all these chronic things or things where continuity of care has to be mentioned, sort of has to be looked at. And therefore I think what we try to do here, and that is something that I don't know how many people resonate with, is that there is, like in an emergency room, there's a triaging of needs that we also need to do when we do social listening and step up sort of on that, on our response. Maybe we don't have the answers all the time. It's okay. It's a crisis, but we should be listening and we should be responsive all the time. You know, I don't think we should be unresponsive and not available at any given point in time. Yeah.
Bhavna, your view?
Yeah, so Rufina and Jasrita have really spoken a lot about how important listening is, and of course, like any good communicator, I think the golden rule is to listen more and speak less, and I think that's what we all need to do in healthcare comms. But just to add, a bit over here in terms of sensitizing everybody that healthcare ecosystem is not just one person, right? It's an ecosystem, and it has the patient at the center of all that you do, and there should be clear patient pathways. If I fall ill, this is what I need to do, this is where I need to go, this is what my insurance does. So there are various aspects to this continuum of care, as we say it. So when we talk of innovation, when OPPI talks of innovation, it's not just innovation in research, but we also believe in innovation in policy making. So we need the right policies, we need the right infrastructure, we need the right ecosystem, right? So I think everything has to work together, and it is whether it's not COVID that is going to drive this ecosystem. It's basically patient well-being that is going to define the new contours of this ecosystem. And like how everybody said, we have bigger problems to deal with: TB, malaria, dengue. These are all issues that we deal with. We try and come up with cures. But the point is that there are deeper questions that one needs to ask, right? I mean, are there enough doctors? Are there enough hospitals? Are there enough capabilities? Are there enough skill sets? Are there enough tests? Are there enough, is there enough money? So a good place to start is an increase.
Bhavna, that's a conversation, healthcare has been having for many, many years.
Absolutely.
And
So
I think it will take some time to
absolutely.
overcome those
I
shortages.
feel that, COVID, no COVID, I think these are conversations that healthcare communicators really need to speak and really need to have clarity on.
So Bhavna, if we may have your last word on the top 2 or 3 priorities that healthcare communicators should have for the next 3 months or 6 months, what would you rate as the top priorities for communication for healthcare communicators?
So I think the topmost priority is to sensitize patients and like how everybody said, to infuse that positivity and hope that, the science-based industry, every member of the healthcare ecosystem is working towards patient well-being, and that is the topmost priority, which needs to be communicated with a lot of clarity. The fact that humanity is quite resilient, COVID cannot really break the resilience of all of us. So I think these are stories that we need to really thump our chest and share. That's the top priority. And the second thing is to build trust and collaborate, especially, healthcare is a very high touch point industry. You have to keep, you have a lot of face-to-face communication, you have lots of that. And now from high touch, we are all moving to low touch, social distancing, whatever. The new norm is going to be virtual, going to be digital. So in that environment, to rebuild the trust of your stakeholders is another priority area that communicators need to work on. And that is possible only when we start collaborating with every member of the ecosystem.
Manjira, your views on top 2 or 3 priorities?
So as I said that, this entire conversation of COVID, I'm just repeating, we don't want to forget about other priorities as well, because India, from a priority point of view, and specifically, the economics and the healthcare is so entrenched. They're just sanitation, public welfare, all of these conversations. And just because I'm a pharma brand does not mean that I don't talk about that. And I think somewhere all of us healthcare professionals also have to proactively do mainline campaigns on removing some of the stigma which I'm seeing against COVID. And in residential buildings, in the slums, we are seeing that one of the reasons people are not going for, okay, so the hospitals are full, testing is not easily available, but people are also wary of really declaring a travel history. We saw that in the early April. So that entire fear and stigma around COVID, and there's really no need. And we saw that during the 80s AIDS crisis, and we don't want that to happen. Because if this is a pandemic which is going to be around for the next 3 years, you could have people opting for testing now, but God forbid when it rebounds at the end of 1.5 years, are you going to be applying for a 14-day furlough or a leave again? Or would you just rather, these are mild symptoms, let me just stay with it? I think the stigmatization has started, and we need to be very wary. We need to talk about that you have to overcome this. That's very important.
So, Rufina, you have a minute and Jasrita has a minute because we have to open for questions. So top 2 or 3 priorities.
I will stick with one priority, Noumaan. Healthcare's reputation has pretty much been a black hole, if you ask me, because we've all been experts in shying away from talking. In COVID-19 times, whether we liked it or not, we all came out and spoke because we found the need, and we went to address that need. Healthcare is not such a black hole, and the reputation of healthcare as a business lies in the hands of healthcare communicators. Now, that is something that we probably need to bear in mind. And my view here is, as a priority, continue the goodwill that healthcare has garnered or gathered in the last few months, and the good support that healthcare workers have provided in the last few months, to build on the reputation of healthcare as an industry as a whole, because there's been so much spoken negative about the healthcare business, be it hospitals, be it labs, be it doctors themselves, who are in the front and center of everything that we're tackling today. So my view is that as communicators, it is so important for us to build on the goodwill to enhance the reputation of healthcare as an industry and as a sector amongst diverse stakeholders, not just consumers, but the government as well, and with the doctors, because industry cannot be seen as, oh, you're there and I'm going to operate from opposite side of the table. That's my only view and priority.
So, Rufina, that was exactly the point I mentioned when I mentioned the newspaper, running that advertising campaign.
Advertising is not the way only that you'd have to do reputation building.
It was an example. It was an example.
We need to find innovative and sensitive ways of doing it, though.
Yeah. So for me, I think the first is that as communicators, we'll have to find the balance between agility of response and ensuring the veracity of response. That's one. That's going to be important in a crisis. Point number 1. Second, I think celebrating the stories of recoveries, amidst all these numbers, which are really, really scary, of how many positive and how many, death rate. I think the numbers that we need to celebrate are the numbers of recovery. So those, communicating those. Third, I think it's time that communicators, brand marketing people also lead the digital transformation journey within their organization, so that tomorrow, if there is a COVID-like event, God forbid 1,000 times, then you're not scurrying for cover and saying that, not the CEO, not the CXO, not the CIO, not the CTO, but COVID-19 did digital transformation for my organization. Okay, so I think we need to sort of also get our hands dirty and sort of, be the digital transformation officers for our own organizations. And last, this collaboration which has come about, because times of adversity do, silos are break down and people come together. The collaboration that has happened between government and the private sector, between the provider and the patient, this needs to become a way of life and not just a tactic that, one has to resort to during times of adversity. So I've got these 4. Thank you.
So I can see a lot of questions in the box, and we'll just quickly pick some of the questions before Anubhuti, comes in.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a question. Could you give us an example of what worked very well? How was digital used, and what was the rate of browsing? I think this is for Bhavna.
The rate of browsing.
Yeah.
I didn't get that either.
Yeah, so but I got the first part of the question, so maybe I can attempt answering that. So how well is digital used? So there are two platforms that we have used effectively at this time, especially to engage with our audience. While I do understand that there are webinar fatigues, and I hope this one certainly isn't, but we have used webinars very extensively to talk about various new concepts like telemedicine. Will it make it to mainstream? Topics about leadership in today's scenario, topics about how pharma marketing, and questions that you asked about field force interactions becoming virtual. So these are all topics of interest. These are all what's going to happen in the future, and the industry, common man, patients, nobody knows what's going to happen. So we do use a lot of digital to get experts in our digital knowledge, and we share that kind of information with everybody around. So I think digital is one area that, I mean, webinars are certainly one area where we share information. And the second thing that I feel leveraging digital technology in healthcare would be platforms like podcasts. Because when people, alternative to screen time, and, people don't have that much of screen time, I think they listen. And the podcast, again, is a very critical medium for healthcare communication, especially if you're seeking a detailed response to a condition, a situation. I think that is an avenue that gives you, scope for detailed discussion. So webinars, podcasts, these are all mediums where healthcare communicators can actually start speaking to their stakeholders digitally.
Sure. The other question is, which I think Manjira and Jasrita can answer. Has COVID changed the communication dynamics internally with your leadership teams, with your board, and also with your consulting companies, your PR consulting companies?
Yeah, I think I'll start that. Of course, I think internally the entire thrust of the conversation has to change, because you're putting employees at the, pharma being under essential services. You were earlier talking about strategy and, results, etc. Not that we don't do that. Q4 results around the corner. But I think overnight, what we did on a much more expedited manner was that we never got a chance to shut shop and figure out how to do operations. March end, 22nd onwards, our plants, which are all under essential services, had to overnight adapt to what we call the new normal. And there were people, the employees were at the forefront of it. While the leaders were there, the employees were on the floor. So you had, in places like Mandideep in Bhopal, you had employees who were traveling 250 kilometers on a scooter to come to the plant to work, because they knew they were part of a critical drug mission, and they had to do that. So what the tonality of the conversation internally, how it changed was that I think, and we've done, I think at Lupin, the Heroes of Lupin campaign, which we've done internally as well as externally, and it's been organically gained great traction, was to capture these stories of positivity and hope. And there were two aspects to it. So one was you were celebrating these people, and the other aspect was that the organizations were also reassuring these people. So, what is it that the company is going to do? So starting from, from the very first week, there's an internal helpline which was launched for all employees and their relatives. If they faced any concerns about COVID, expediting hospital admissions for employees who were, or their family members who had critical issues. So trying to do all of that, you are going beyond the call of duty. You could stay at home and say that, so what if I'm part of pharma? So if you were celebrating these heroes, you were also reassuring them that, you had their backs. And I think that was a great shift in internal communications, which we saw, because even right now, the leadership is listening and the leadership is just aligning us with the direction, but the conversation and the heroes are really the people in the front line.
Sure. Jasrita, your view?
So, yeah, so, at least the internal journey was pretty much like Manjira's, so 24th is when the lockdown was announced, 25th is when Most of the state medical councils said that you can do e-consultation. 27th night, our e-consultation platform had to go live. So for about 48 hours, it was burning the proverbial midnight oil to be able to get a platform up and get it to people, because each day, each hour was important. So that's the internal journey, with internal stakeholders, and I think also a word of commendation here for. And I think I'll be speaking now on behalf of everyone, or at least for the sector that I represent, that a word of commendation for social media agencies, online reputation management agencies, PR agencies which work with the comms teams, etc. I think they've also been working over, you could say, 24/7 to be able to provide for the communication needs which are there during this time. So definitely the dynamic has changed, and there is a healthy respect and regard and the sense which I've been saying that we are in it together. Either we are going to swim together or we're going to sink together, hopefully swim together, right? Not sink.
So one last question which everybody can quickly answer. Do you think that healthcare communication will get more focus from organizations going forward? So communicators playing an important role in healthcare organizations, one. And do you also see the budgets increasing for spending on communication?
Oxymoron.
Especially digital.
I think I'll go for this. All right. Yeah, Rufina, go ahead.
It's actually weird because definitely the communication jobs are going to increase because now they see the value of communications and in saving brands and reputation and keeping the dialogue ongoing. The style of communicators is going to change. The job description is not going to be the same as it was before. It's going to be probably a lot more all-encompassing and a lot more strategic in nature. I'm using that word for want of a better word because it is going to be able to sit on the table and to be able to make decisions along with business leads for it to be making sense to stakeholders. Because it's not about communicating a business decision that communicators are going to be expected to do, but be a part of the decision-making process. So there's going to be more communication jobs, in my opinion. However, the job description of communicators is going to change and it's going to become a lot more strategic and leadership driven and leadership thinking, of course.
Sure. Jasrita?
She said it. More jobs, more load, different role, definitely more responsibility, not the same, just doing PRs, etc., etc. More on digital, yes. More budgets? I'm not too sure. I'm not too sure.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with both the ladies here. I just believe that any which ways, healthcare communication is very nuanced, very tough to crack. And I think all the people on the call here and all our panelists can absolutely agree with me that it's extremely strategic, like how Rufina said. And going ahead, I think like how she said it, it's going to play a very important role in business decisions, rather play a more important role in it. Digital, yes, that's what we all believe will be more of engagement, more of activity. But I think at the core, it's always going to be the patient. And just to have just 30 seconds more, Noumaan, I just remembered a line from my favorite film, and this is a Hollywood film called Patch Adams, and it had the late Robin Williams, okay, and he said this line. He said that if you treat a disease, you may win, you may lose, but if you treat a patient, a person, I guarantee you will win. So I think that's what communicators, the entire healthcare business is going to be driven by. It's going to be driven by patient needs, and the person and the communicator who gets it right, who understands it, I think he or she will be premium in the industry. And I would encourage people to actually start thinking about the whole of healthcare communications from the patient's view, to make each one of us more valuable in what we do and bring value to what we do. Thanks.
Manjira?
Yeah, so I think everyone's largely said what even I believe, that it's not that, communicators, I think, particularly in the healthcare industry, apart from, and I have a previous experience with banking, and I think these are two industries where I feel communicators have been at the very core of certain leadership discussions, because it plays such a critical role, and transparency and trust. And as I think Rufina said earlier, we've been a beleaguered industry. There have been so many allegations against us, and so that battle is not something we are fighting today. And it's just today that people have sort of woken up to us as I said, the last port of call. And we have to bring in nuance in that conversation, that this is what is possible, and there is an equal amount of patient activism, which we will also see. And so that needs to be tempered. And I think that's an additional responsibility for us. So if the jobs go up, I don't know if the nature of the job description will change. It also depends upon the HR person who's writing the job description. But I do know that the demands of the job are definitely going to go up. There's going to be tremendous pressure on us, because how are you going to straddle transparency with reputation management and offering hope? There are three triangles which I really don't see, three corners of the triangle. How are they going to meet? So that's a great challenge for us.
Sure. So thank you, Manjira, Bhavna, Jasrita, Rufina, and now to Anubhuti.
Thank you, Noumaan.
Thank you.
Yes, Noumaan.
Thank you, Noumaan. This was indeed an enlightening discussion. I would like to thank our panelists, Bhavna, Jasrita, Rufina, and Manjira, for their time today and for sharing their insights with us. A special mention, of course, to the moderator, Noumaan, for navigating this discussion in such an apt direction. Thank you to all our attendees. I'm sure you're going away with a lot of learnings. If you wish to revisit this session, it will be available on the Reputation Today YouTube channel, and also on the YouTube channel of the School of Communication and Reputation. We will see you next week on Friday at 3 p.m. with another session focused on PSUs this time. Do follow us on Twitter at RepTodayMag for more information and for the link to sign up for next Friday.
Anubhuti, if I may please, there were a lot of questions there, which probably is a responsibility for us to try and answer. I do not know how we can crack it, but if there is a possibility we can answer some of them and probably send it to the group, I think that would be most appreciated. Happy to bring in responses if it's required.
Sure.
Yeah.
We'll definitely look at a way on how we can handle that. Thank you once again.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.